So we'll just go straight into it. We're both library professionals. We work in academic libraries, and we work together as information assistants in the collections department at Salford University. So Abby still works at Salford, and I've moved on to a role at Manchester University. So thanks everyone for joining us.
I'm so sorry, Lindsay, to cut you off. It's just gone slightly. I haven't meant to do this.
Don't worry, it's fine.
Sorry, if I just start again and come out.
Yeah, no problem. All good.
Okay, sorry, that should be fine now.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, just wanted to start off by saying thank you for attending this event, and thank you, Georges, for organising it. We hope that you find some of the areas that we're going to talk about useful when you're thinking about how you can become an ally and what you can do at your own organisation. The presentation itself is predominantly about championing underrepresented voices and anti-racism work, and how myself and Abby have attempted to demonstrate allyship with non-white colleagues and students by our everyday actions in our roles. We refer to allyship, and what we mean is the action of listening, learning, and demonstrating solidarity with marginalised community through our actions and what we do in our roles. So first of all, we're clearly both white, and we're cis women and work in the overwhelmingly white academic library sector. Our whiteness, among some of our other characteristics, affords us privilege in our everyday lives, and we're not here today to claim that we've solved institutional racism or eradicated inequality. In addition to this, we also just feel like it's important to acknowledge from the beginning that we've got no lived experience of racism, and we're absolutely by no means here to colonise the issues of racism in educational institutions. We do hope that, however, by sharing how we've attempted to use our privilege to demonstrate allyship, we can show you that we all have a responsibility in creating an inclusive and anti-racist culture within our organisations. So ultimately, actions at education institutes can help shape attitudes and form solidarities. They have a huge impact on students' lives during and post-education, and we believe that our actions as educators can inform behaviour in workplaces of the future and society in general. We also believe that there are things that we can all do to build an inclusive culture where we work, and that we can all be allies.
So I'll just give a quick outline of our talk today. So firstly, we're going to introduce you to the institutions and roles in which we're currently working, and then we'll outline the context and incentives to the projects we've been working on in the University of Salford Library, and what we see as the role of education institutions in this work. And then we're then going to discuss in some more detail of these projects, including how we initiated them, before looking at some of the challenges and limitations we've identified. And then finally, we'll conclude with our key points and have some time for questions. So since Lindsay moved to working at the University of Manchester, we've been speaking about how the type of institution, for example, its size and staffing, encourages or makes more difficult the type of projects we'll be discussing in this presentation. So in this vein, we thought it'd be useful just to give a brief introduction to the universities. So the University of Salford used to be Salford Technical College, which provided students with training in industrial skills. And in 1967, the college became the university, and now Salford has over 23,000 students, 2,500 staff, and is ranked 92nd in the 2021 University League table. And there's still a really strong vocational bent to the courses, and a major focus on industry collaboration, with particular focus on robotics, digital and smart living. And staff at the university are encouraged to act in line with a series of Salford behaviours that includes actions like connecting and inspiring, and these are meant to encourage continuous improvement and empower staff to act on their ideas. So Lindsay and I both worked in the main university library, just the Clifford Whitworth, and as information assistants in the collections team, we help purchase, maintain and promote the library's physical and digital collections. And compared to other universities, our collections team is very small and do a bigger range of activities than they would in the same role at a larger institution. So there's a very hands-on approach, and with such a small team, it's easy to collaborate with others and share expertise. We think this was really helpful in establishing and maintaining the projects that we're going to talk about today.
Okay, so as I mentioned, I've moved to the University of Manchester working in the library. It's one of the UK's leading universities. It's a Russell Group and their focus is predominantly on research and teaching. There's around 40,000 students, 12,000 staff and well over 480,000 alumni. Manchester is guided by the motto, which I'm not going to pronounce very well, Cognitio Sapientia Humanatis, which is knowledge, wisdom, and humanity. And it has three core goals, which is world-class research, outstanding learning, and social responsibility. So I'm currently working as a reading list assistant in the library at Manchester. So I'm part of a small team of staff who manage the resources that are required by academic staff for reading lists and teaching. The university library itself comprises of 11 sites that are spread across Manchester and the university campus. It is one of only 5 national research libraries in the UK, and it's the only national research library in the north of England. So, as Abby mentioned, the library team was really small at Salford, and because of this, we could collaborate and share expertise really easily. I found in my new role, despite being in a small team, as I'm part of a much larger institution, it's been quite difficult to get to know staff and get involved in activism. So I'm going to touch a bit more on that later.
So now we're just going to move on to discussing the different projects that we've been working on. Obviously, enthusiasm and support from colleagues in management are crucial in getting these projects off the ground. We were really lucky at Salford to be really encouraged from staff at all levels when we proposed them. And we were then fully supported with time, with expertise and with funding, despite being very new staff members. I think this creates a really positive and encouraging environment for the staff to propose similar projects. Also, the fact we were able to start immediately without any bureaucratic delay meant the projects proactively reacted to wider events. And crucially, we found that across the library, staff were very receptive to the projects, so whether by attending or promoting events or offering ideas, and this allowed them to spread across the university. So we'll also look at some of the challenges and limitations to them as well as the impact of COVID. So I'm just going to begin by looking at the first project, which was proposed in January 2020, so just a few months before the first lockdown. And that was to set up a zine library in the university library. And the plan was to have space for browsing and reading zines, space to make zines, regular workshops and exhibitions, and opportunities for students to shape the collection. So for anyone who isn't familiar with zine, I'm just going to give a quick overview. It's hard to come to an exact definition because there's such a massive variation, but generally they're self-published, non-commercial, small circulation publications. And they're an alternative publishing method, so they're often used by groups who want to avoid the world of mainstream publishing or whose voices are unheard or distorted in mainstream publishing, or also just people who have really niche interests. And basically they allow people to share their own stories or thoughts unfettered. And they can be traced from the dawn of the printing press through the sci-fi fanzines in the 1930s, punk zines and football fanzines in the 70s, feminist punk riot girl zines in the 90s, and the zine scene is very much still alive today. So there's Salford Zine Library in Manchester, and the Northwest Zine Fest and Weirdo Zine Fest in Leeds. Then in Glasgow, there's Good Press and Glasgow Zine Library and Glasgow Zine Fest. There are also lots of places with archives of zines, so that includes the Working Class Movement Library, which is just opposite the University of Salford. So why have a zine library? So I think having a zine library will bring a bigger range of voices and stories into the library's collections and help preserve these for future library users. So we've got zines in our collection deal candidly with class, sexuality, gender, race, disability, and much else, and it's often coming from a personal perspective. So for example, from our collection, Paul Sammett's Ideal Homes describes growing up gay in suburbia under the UK's Section 22 law, and the series Poor Lass, edited by Selena and M, gives space for working class women to write about their own lives. And I think the huge array in the content of zines means that there's likely something of interest and engaging to most library users, including those who struggle with longer texts. And then someone who has a browse through the zines might then feel inspired and feel able to create their own. And we can help facilitate that through making sessions. And we hope that the zine library will be an active space. Zines can also provide sources for research as they give unique perspectives on a range of issues. There's actually a zine making course at Salford, but we think this would be relevant to many other subjects. And it's also a way to connect with local zine makers and groups and events. So as mentioned earlier, there's plenty of activity going on, which it'd be great to support. So I'm now just going to quickly discuss the steps that we've taken at Salford in setting up our own zine library. So restrictions have meant that browsing in the university library isn't currently possible, but we've been able to develop and promote the collection, and we've now got over 100 zines. And as I've received funding, we've purchased these through a mix of zine distributors and direct from the maker. Some people I've spoken to have also wanted to donate, and the zines have been chosen with a particular local focus and across a broad range of themes. And I've also worked with input from the library's EDI champions. So once the library is accessible, we'll continue to purchase, but we also want students and staff to help shape the collection. There are some potential issues in offering a zine library in an academic library. So due to the personal information and content, zine makers might not feel comfortable with a zine being in such a public place, or the maker might not want their zines held within a university institution. So that's meant that I've sought permission from all the makers before including the zines, and I've also sought cataloguing information and any limits to the zine's use. And then over lockdown, I was able to refine this process into an agreement form so makers can submit all details about their zines in one place. And this is then fed into our cataloguing process. So in libraries, cataloguing is the process of creating data which makes the library resources discoverable. And we thought that it was important that the zines were discoverable on our library system to generate interest and establish the zines as a collection. Again, there are some challenges. So as mentioned, zines can deal with very personal subjects, and we want to ensure that we reflect the material accurately. And many zines are also missing traditional cataloging. So conversations with other members of zine libraries and library staff have been hugely helpful in shaping our approach. And we've established a unique cataloguing system, which is dictated by the zine makers themselves. And that just ensures that they're happy with the way that the zines are represented to the public. And then during lockdown, we've also been able to make initial promotions of the zine library in the university. So back in April, I did a Teams presentation to a large number of library staff on zines, the history of zines and plans for the zine library. And it also allowed them to ask any questions and share any ideas, and helped ensure colleagues are informed and engaged in plans. Then I also put together a reading list of materials and links to other zine libraries, which I can share at the end of this presentation. And then in library blog posts for Black History Month, LGBTQ+ History Month and International Women's Day, I highlighted relevant zines from the collection and also discussed the history of zines in these areas. And I hope this demonstrated how zines offer valuable perspectives on social and political issues, and that they're a valid resource alongside traditional library materials. And this has received great feedback and led to a student reaching out to discuss queer zines on a university radio segment. I've also been able to install a coming soon zine display in the Clifford Whitworth Library, including information on the zine library and on the zines displayed, and hope this will be a point of interest in the library space and will help get students and staff engaged with plans. And then finally, I've given 2 presentations at Northern Library events outlining plans, and I've run an online zine making workshop. I'm really keen to connect with colleagues who are interested or carrying out similar work, so please do get in touch. And just to go over our future plans. So the next step will be having the library out for students to browse once that's permitted. And then we'll promote this through the blog, Twitter, Instagram and student radio. We'll get started on the zine making events, and we'll be encouraging students to submit and recommend zines and help shape the collection and the collection policy. Then the zine display will be changed every couple of months for different themes. And then we'll want to get involved in wider events, for instance, Northwest Zine Fest, and have local makers visit for workshops. Then looking further ahead, we want to explore digitisation options and installing a digital display for these in the library. So I'm now just going to touch on a couple of new library website projects I've been involved with, which have started over the past 6 months. So in January, we launched a streamlined WordPress blog for the library, which is run by 5 individuals from different teams across the library. And we write blog posts and edit blog posts submitted by library staff and academics. So as well as providing study advice and service information, the blog has allowed us to promote a broad range of library resources and collections relevant to events like International Women's Day, LGBTQ+ History Month and Mental Health Awareness Week. It's also allowed us to reflect critically on our collections and issue calls to action. So an example of this is our LGBTQ+ History Month blog. So archivist Alexandra Mitchell reflected that there'd been very little research done into LGBTQ+ histories in our archives. So to encourage interested readers to do this, she laid out engaging suggestions of areas which might be fruitful to explore and clearly explained how to go about archival research. And this particular post received an immediate high readership with around 200 unique page views and a big reaction on Twitter. And from analytics, we've also seen the blog's been accessed from all over the world, including the US, South Africa and India, and that the posts continue to be accessed beyond their initial launch. And then just one other new feature was at the end of February, the library's EDI champions launched a permanent EDI Spotlight feature on our library search homepage. So the Spotlight will describe and link to a different EDI related resource every month. So that includes ebooks, films, databases and articles. So for example, you can see here, we've got the featured resources, Exact Editions, Black Lives Matter magazine article collection. We hope having it in this central position on the website and easy to access will encourage explorations of engaging resources which might otherwise be overlooked. And the team's also taking suggestions from other colleagues in the library and are encouraging submissions from students. And we're also looking into starting an archive of the Spotlight so people can access all the chosen resources in one space and there's a constant record. So now I'm just going to pass over to Lindsay, who's going to discuss further initiatives in the library.
Thank you, Abby. So I'm going to talk about some of the work that I was involved in at the University of Salford Library. We were sort of trying to create a real culture of anti-racism in the library. And yeah, some of the things I'll outline, we'll explore that. So over the past year, obviously we've had COVID, various lockdowns, general restrictions on freedom and the shift to home working and blended learning. Which has presented everyone working in education, well, everyone everywhere, but everyone working in education with particular and unique challenges. In libraries, it's sort of my ethos personally that we have a responsibility to support students and academic staff in teaching and learning, but also I think that libraries can be really enriching places and we should also be supporting students and staff through well-being, and we have an obligation to respond to events that have huge global significance. So with the murder of George Floyd in the summer of 2020, there was a huge call for institutions to tackle systemic racism. We started thinking about in the library how we could show solidarity with staff, students and the wider Black Lives Matter movement. It felt particularly urgent due to the added factors of staff and students being isolated at home and obviously the implications of the pandemic. Around this time, tensions and anxiety was really high worldwide, and we felt that our community at Salford needed us to be vocal and proactive in the support that we offered. And I think this quote, "If you're neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor," was what really motivated me to start doing some anti-racist work around this time. I'm going to discuss a few of the projects that we actioned at Salford Uni Library now after the so-called social awakening of last summer. So our immediate response, we obviously released a supporting statement of the Black Lives Matter movement to staff and students, but sort of after that in the library, we utilised the Leganto reading list system to curate a list of resources around racism and Black Lives Matter and well-being and various other topics. We had a really broad range of resources. We gathered articles, ebooks, websites, videos, podcasts, archives, films, TV shows, just sort of everything you can think of, and we put them all into this one Black Lives Matter reading list that was accessible for staff and students. I managed to negotiate a bit of a budget with the collections librarian, which allowed us to identify gaps in the stock and make purchases based on our own library knowledge, but also based on suggestions that we were getting from staff and students of what they would like to read around this topic. Where we held physical books, but the library was closed, so they weren't accessible. We endeavoured to source additional access to these items electronically and felt that by collecting all of the purchases in one accessible area, this was a small demonstration of support and allyship for everyone at the university. And also by promoting this, a lot of people don't know what's available at the library that you can access for free. So we hope that it sort of let people know what was on offer. We encouraged staff and students to contribute to the list and make suggestions, which we took on board every single suggestion, and whenever possible, wherever it was available, we purchased items specifically based on these suggestions. Every time we added to the list, we sort of promoted that there was additions on the library website and via all of our social media channels. Certainly among staff, we found that everyone was really positive and supportive of this project. We had many active contributors, and around the time that we were putting this together, there was a real sense of solidarity. And we really hope that that demonstrated to non-white colleagues and students that they can come to the library for support and allyship, and we're going to be proactive. So just to sort of demonstrate the reach of the reading list, we, in order to maximise the reach, we shared the link across all of our social media on the website, and we were very active in promoting the reading list and encouraging staff, particularly via Teams, to engage in what was on there. We shared everything that we put together with the wider university comms and marketing team, who passed on the information to the Students' Union and the Vice-Chancellor, who both highlighted and encouraged engagement with the list in their formal addresses that they made to staff and students after George Floyd's murder. By ensuring that the list was published in public, we were also able to ensure that people who were outside the university who had an interest through various people networks and things could also access the resources. In order to support the ease of accessibility, we created a QR code, and that was shared widely, and you could scan it and it would take you straight to all of the resources we put together. And we carried on asking staff and students to be active in making suggestions. So when I left Salford in March, the list had been created with 115 items in 7 sections, and it had been accessed roughly 730 times. So another example of work that we went on to do in the library last year is the Black History Month activities in October. So we ran a social media spotlight campaign, and we highlighted the brilliance of a selection of Black authors, historians and poets. And we tried to sort of link this to our library collection, and hoped that by doing this, it would encourage staff and students to explore what we had on offer. Some of the individuals that we spotlighted were Marcus Rashford, David Olusaga and Lem Sissy. This is an example of one of the graphics that we posted on our social media, and we accompanied it with text. So just a brief example of the text that accompanied Lem Sissy was: Lem Sissy is an author, poet and broadcaster. Growing up in care, he's dedicated to encouraging as many care leavers as possible into education. To learn more about his life and work, type his name into library search and you'll find an abundance of resources. So in this instance, we were retweeted by Lem Sissy, who's got a connection to Manchester. He's the Vice-Chancellor of Manchester University. Because he retweeted us and he has a huge platform, this increased the overall engagement across all of our Black History Month activity on Twitter. So that was great. And in addition to the spotlights, we created a weeklet of recommended reading. We collected contributions from staff across the library, and this was again to try and encourage people to engage with everything that we'd purchased after the summer last year. Excuse me. So another one of the other events that we did for Black History Month was across the university. I feel personally, and I think it's the approach of the wider library as well, that cross-university collaboration is really important if you want to try and create an anti-racist and inclusive culture where you work. And so I collaborated directly with a nursing academic to create an event called Retention. So the event entailed hosting a short film online and providing supportive reading materials through the reading list system. The reading materials that we curated were supposed to encourage reflection on the film. The themes of the film and reading were around racism and microaggressions in higher education. It was a short film that was actually made by some film students at Leeds University. We used Blackboard Ultra to host the event, and it was led by the academic, and I supported with the library side of things. So we evaluated the format that we used and made recommendations to senior leadership based on the feedback that we got from attendees. As a result of our recommendations, the senior leadership team at Salford have actually had training on microaggressions from the people who are involved in making the film. And this format of sort of hosting a film on Blackboard, which we obviously have access to, and curating reading materials through Leganto, is now being looked at as a straightforward, cost-effective way to roll out this kind of training across university to all staff members. So I think this is a perfect example of where sort of small actions that you can get involved in your everyday can actually result in quite wide institutional change if you pursue things and collect feedback and listen and encourage change. So I'm going to go on now to talk about the anti-racist reading group that we set up at Salford in the library. Due to the engagement with the reading list that we created and sort of the continued contribution from staff to that list, it was clear that there was a thirst for education from staff across the university on issues of race and anti-racism. So we created the anti-racist reading group. As we were all working remotely, we've used Teams to create a space for staff to discuss a book on the theme of anti-racism every 6 weeks. It was organised and facilitated by myself, and anything that was being read would be available in the library. I had that collections, the ability to purchase things, so I could make sure that everything that we discussed was available freely from the library for the group members. We had a steady flow of staff joining continually from when we set it up until when I left Salford. So as of March, we had 108 members and a varied attendance each month's meeting, but always a good attendance. We began with reading and discussing non-fiction titles such as Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. But we evaluated, as we kind of moved through the reading group, that in order to have a broader impact and try and engage with members who might not have the time or the inclination to read sort of a hefty non-fiction title, we explored the idea of watching films. We watched one of the films from the Small Axe series and reading fiction as well. So the group remains a sort of predominantly reading group, but we've really found that using different mediums and exploring things of different lengths and things has encouraged our members to consume a lot more diverse content and has been a really positive thing. So something like the anti-racist reading group, which we found at Salford there was an absolute definite appetite for, is something that I think that any staff member at any organisation could set up. Not particularly time intensive to organise, and if you enjoy reading and you want to educate yourself on anti-racism, it's a great space to organise to be able to have conversations in. I will just say, just a bit of advice if anyone's thinking about this kind of thing, is I'm a white woman. I'm clearly not the best placed person to lead conversations on race and racism, and I was facilitating and organising the group. However, this was very much in the format of a discussion group. So while I maybe encouraged conversation, I by no means led things or dominated the group. And we also made it really clear in the sort of, sorry, I just got distracted by the comment there. Thank you, Tina. Yes, so although we made it really clear in our sort of advertisement in the group sort of like mantra was that It was a white-led group. Anybody was welcome to attend. Nobody was excluded from attending, but we made it very, very clear. White-led group. It was geared towards white members of staff who were looking to learn about race and anti-racism. So anyone who's thinking about arranging this kind of thing should think carefully about the aims of the group, who the group's for, and just I would encourage you to be incredibly transparent about it. Just to finish up, so these are a few examples of the work that we did at Salford when I was there, and I'm incredibly aware that issues of institutional racism are vast and complex, and I'm by no means suggesting a reading group or any of the work that we've outlined is the solution, but I hope that this inspires you to take a bit of action and try and show some solidarity with staff and students who are experiencing racism. And also, we've all got an obligation, I think, to educate ourselves and everyone that we work with on anti-racist practice. Thank you.
So just to continue from that, so as the project is still in the relatively early stages, we can't really feed back on their long-term impact. But as time's gone on, we've identified some challenges and limitations with them, and we thought it'd be useful to run through just to give you some points of reflection if you're thinking of initiating similar projects. So one other obvious challenge has been the pandemic. So for events like the reading group, online working has worked really well. It made the event far more far-reaching than perhaps it would have been in person. And though we found ways to develop the zine library remotely, it does really require physically being in a place. And given that some people might not feel immediately comfortable gathering in physical spaces, it's worth thinking about remote options to make projects as inclusive as possible. As Lindsay said, we're also very conscious that as white staff members in the library, initiating work to majority white staff in the library, and that the people involved in the projects are often already involved with anti-racist work. So we'd really like to ensure the projects include a diverse range of voices and isn't just an echo chamber. And we'd want to ensure the projects span across the university community. And this definitely requires continued reflection, feedback gathering and outreach. We're also conscious of the long-term viability of the projects. So basically, how can we be sure that the work will continue if the instigator of it leaves the institution? So the work really needs to be spread through teams and structures in place to ensure its continuation. And by involving all staff and providing robust instructions, we believe this could be mitigated. The work's also time intensive and undertaken on top of the regular workload, so ideally management will build in time for this, and again, spreading through the team will be beneficial. And obviously with such crucial work, it would be good to have the whole team on board anyway. And of course, this work can't function in isolation. It's got to be part of a wider EDI plan across the institution to be properly effective. So a great example is the retention workshop that Lindsay mentioned, feeding into university staff training. And now Lindsay's just going to go into more detail on how the institution itself might present challenges to initiating EDI work.
Thank you. So yeah, since beginning my new role at a vastly larger institution, I have found it quite difficult to become involved in activism and anti-racist work. I personally haven't found it particularly visible at the University of Manchester. I'm sure with time I'll find out a bit more about what's going on. From my perspective, there's certainly at a very high level a lot of talk about EDI, and we've just had a new Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion appointed. So conversations are happening at a high level, and EDI is weaved into the university's policies and the plans that they talk about for the future. From what I can see, however, on the ground, I'm struggling to see what's actually happening. In my own department in the library, there seems to be a real lack of anything happening, or certainly anything I can find out about. When I've asked my managers what I can get involved with and given them examples of the kind of work that I did at Salford, the answer I've tended to be given is there'll be things coming soon from the directorate that you can get involved in, which I'm sure people will recognise that kind of sentence. It can be really deflating and in terms of motivating you to get involved in this kind of work if you're not being sort of encouraged by management, like we were really fortunate to be at Salford. Yeah, it can really batter your motivation. So another barrier that I found since starting in my new role is that it's been entirely remote. and being at a large institution, the teams and departments, you're very sectioned off. I focus on a very narrow part of library work, and I work within a very small team. And my experience since I've started has been sort of getting to grips with the work that my team does and getting to grips with my job. So I've not really had the chance to meet people and have conversations and find out what's going on in the library and the wider university. So that's obviously challenging. And so to try and get involved in anti-racist work, I've needed to be quite proactive. I've also needed to be confident in approaching people that I don't really know very much about and I've not met. So kind of having to be willing to put out emails to people that I don't know very much about. And I've had to do a little bit of research. I'm just going to talk about what I have found at the University of Manchester and how one of the sort of challenges has become a bit of a positive. Had I found staff to really quickly engage with, I might not have found out about the incredibly inspiring and active student-led group called Decolonise University of Manchester. I wouldn't have thought to go down the route of becoming involved with work that students were doing, but actually it's hugely beneficial for them to have a staff member supporting them, because let's be honest, we have access to funds, we have access to certain things that they don't have access at the institution. So yeah, if I would also like say to people who are thinking about this kind of work and struggling to find a route in at their organisation, if you're struggling to find staff who want to collaborate with you, every university, college, further education institute will have an active student-led group, and there's so much you can learn from students, and they're just so motivating in terms of encouraging activism. So I've taken this from the Decolonise UOM's manifesto on their website. They describe themselves as a collective of students at the University of Manchester who, through political education and building collective power, aim to reimagine and build a democratic, liberated and free education for all. They go on to say that they advocate for justice by dismantling the racist, ableist, transphobic, homophobic, sexist structures of the university. They advocate for they advocate for an end to the hostile, racist and xenophobic environment infringing on their campus, and they advocate for a decolonised curriculum. So I reached out to that group and have already managed to commit some support through using my position in the library to support their radical reading group. I am in the early stages of pushing for a budget for them, because I want to ensure that anything that they want to read in their radical reading group is available freely for them in the library. I've secured support from the library also for a poetry event that a group of really young students are organising for South Asian Heritage Month. They're incredible, and have committed ongoing library support going forward through just generally using my sort of knowledge of books and purchasing, and also we've got a wide social media reach in the library at Manchester Uni, so I've also said that we can advertise any events or anything on the library social media. So I hope that this sort of demonstrates to you that although there definitely will always be challenges in getting involved in anti-racist work and activism, there also will always be something that you can get involved in. Even if a project isn't led by you and you're not directly involved, allyship is all about using, or I see allyship as being about using my privilege to be vocal and supportive of anti-racist work wherever possible. And universities, yes, Naira, Decolonise UOM, sorry, I've just seen the question there about the Ahmed Iqbal Ullah Race Centre, which is an incredible archive in Manchester, which we can talk about later. Sorry, I'm digressing. They're actually doing an event with Decolonise UOM. They're brilliant. So yeah, what was I saying? Yeah, universities and colleges and places of education are amazing hives of activity. Students are incredible and they're always so motivated and inspiring. And they'll really motivate you to become active. So we're placed in a really good sector to be active and learn and educate ourselves. And I will just say, I'm not. I don't know about the work that's happening with staff at the University of Manchester. I'm sure it's a huge institution. There will be staff doing incredible work. I'm positive of it. So yeah, I don't want it to come across like I'm criticising people who are doing work. I'm just yet to get involved in it and find out about it. But I plan on persevering, and yeah, definitely looking forward to finding allies among staff and like-minded individuals. Thank you.
So just before taking any questions or thoughts, we're just going to sum up some of our key points. So firstly, the limitations and challenges we've addressed should in no way prevent action. We'd really encourage other colleagues to act on their instincts or ideas, big or small. We hope the suggestions we've made today give ideas of how this could be done. Of course, as we've addressed, the ways of acting might differ depending on the institution. However, as education professionals, we all have a responsibility to engage people, inspire learning and change within our institutions. And then we'd also encourage seeking support and involvement from colleagues across departments, including staff and students, and collaborating across institutions. And this will help ensure the continuity of the project and that a broad range of voices are included. And as we've mentioned, we'd also encourage critical reflection of the projects and your own role in it. For example, who is the project reaching? Who is it benefiting? If organising events, who is attending? And why aren't certain people or communities attending? And then to do this, the project should be closely monitored and feedback sought. And it's important that any work undergone shouldn't be seen as something that has fixed the problem of racism. As education institutions, we should be constantly learning, evolving, reacting and reflecting, and this should be constantly ongoing. And finally, just to reiterate, it must come as part of a wider institutional effort. We'd also really like to connect with colleagues involved in similar work, and we'd be happy to feedback on the progress of these projects in the future if you're interested.